It's the Brian Lehrer Show on WNYC. Good Friday morning, everyone. So one of the biggest Supreme Court rulings of this term, as you no doubt know, was last week, the one that upheld birthright citizenship, the constitutional provision that anyone born in the United States is automatically a U.S. citizen. But Congresswoman from Queens, Grace Meng, chair of the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus, will join us in a minute, says Democrats need a strategy to fight the administration's desire to try to sink it again. President Trump's reaction to the Supreme Court ruling was to urge Congress to, in fact, pass legislation that would somehow get around that Supreme Court ruling. House Speaker Mike Johnson basically said, "Sure, Mr. President, we'll give that a try."
It's a threat to the rule of law and national security. We do need to address it. We're looking at all angles. If there's some legislative fix, we'll advance that immediately. If it's a constitutional amendment, as you know, it takes a little more time.
Speaker Mike Johnson this week on Fox News Sunday. We'll discuss that now with Congresswoman Meng, as well as some other things, including the state of the Democratic Party going into the midterms this fall. She's one of those New York City Democrats who fended off a challenge from her left. We'll also, by the way, get a DSA take on the state of the party later in the show. Grace Meng represents New York's 6th Congressional District, which includes all or parts of Auburndale, Bayside, Elmhurst, and East Elmhurst, Flushing, Forest Hills, Glendale, Kew Gardens, Maspeth, Middle Village, Murray Hill, Woodside, and Rego Park. Maybe I'm even leaving something out. All of those neighborhoods in Queens. Congresswoman Meng, congratulations on your renomination, first of all, and welcome back to WNYC.
Thanks, Brian. It's so great to be back, and kudos to you knowing all those neighborhoods.
I come from just outside your district. Let's start with birthright citizenship. It's not secure now, despite last week's Supreme Court ruling with 5 justices declaring it a constitutional right?
Well, I would say we can be happy and content, but we don't want to prolong the celebration for too long. I was literally outside of the Capitol with colleagues from the Black and Hispanic caucus when we got the news of the decision. And as you mentioned, we are already seeing how President Trump and Republicans are trying to change the Supreme Court decision. This is about birthright citizenship. This is about a constitutional right. I myself am a birthright citizen. And we have already heard President Trump wants Mike Johnson to do something about it and is even trying to get the Supreme Court to hear it again.
Well, here's one way that they might try to end birthright citizenship, at least for some people. It would be a bill to outlaw what they call birth tourism. I'm going to read from a Politico article from Wednesday. It says, Speaker Mike Johnson is exploring whether to put legislation on the House floor that would end the ability of pregnant women to enter the United States legally to gain citizenship for their children. Congresswoman, it sounds like that would target pregnant women who are coming into the country for the purpose of giving birth here, whether or not they were intending to stay at that time or coming for other reasons. Have you heard of your colleagues on the other side of the aisle preparing any kind of bill specifically like that?
I haven't heard about anything specific yet, but I wouldn't put it past them. And that's just yet another example of the House Republicans and President Trump targeting women again. And so we will keep an eye out. But this, again, they are often overblowing out of proportion what they think and perceive of as problems.
On the merits, they would argue that that's not what the birthright citizenship clause of the 14th Amendment was for. They argue even if the court ruled that it applies to immigrants and not just formerly enslaved Black Americans, it was never intended for people gaming the system in that way, coming just to give birth for the advantages that might confer. How would you respond to that argument?
I find it really funny and contradicting that Justice Thomas, who always loves to talk about a colorblind constitution, is all of a sudden focused on what he believes was the intent and origin of something like this. And so, no, I don't agree.
why would it be for people who just want to come here for the express purpose of their children being born citizens?
Well, they are trying to, again, blow out of proportion a situation where someone may be pregnant and they may be in the United States, but that doesn't mean that it is a widespread issue or that it is happening on a wider scale.
As chair of the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus and with a significant Chinese American population among those in your district, I'm sure you're aware of President Trump's post after the Supreme Court ruling. The post said, "I would like to congratulate President Xi and the great country of China on their massive birthright citizenship win." And he signed it, President Donald J. Trump. In March, Trump also posted that birthright citizenship was being exploited by, quote, rich people in China, unquote. And last year, there was a report from the Heritage Foundation, which is, of course, in coordination with Trump officials in their Project 2025 book and other things. The Heritage report was specifically called "The New Face of Birth Tourism, Chinese Nationals, American Surrogates, and Birthright Citizenship." Do you think they're singling out people from China? And do you think there's any truth to this notion that the new face of birth tourism, as they call it, is Chinese nationals paying American surrogates to have babies for them here?
Well, this president is certainly someone who has a lot of practice and intention on putting a target on the backs of Chinese Americans. From the COVID pandemic, where he literally put a target on the backs of our community and people were discriminated against and attacked verbally and even physically, to trying to continuously re-implement the China initiative, to blowing out of proportion the issue of agricultural land purchased by the Chinese. There are so many instances where he is just trying to play king and trying to decide who he thinks should be a citizen and who he thinks should be in this country. Just a few weeks ago, we had a hearing in our Appropriations Committee where his Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, and speaking of advocating for rich people and the types of people he wants in this country, where they argue that our Afghanistan allies and refugees who had been vetted could not assimilate as well as, Afrikaners. And so, this is just yet another example of him actually advocating for the wealthy and also trying to decide and play king on who deserves to be in this country.
I think you haven't said explicitly whether you think birth tourism, quote unquote, coming here expressly for the sake of giving birth is right or wrong. You just said it's exaggerated in terms of the proportion at which it's happening, the rate at which it's happening. Will you say right or wrong?
I would have to have better statistics and data. But if someone is in this country and the baby is born in this country, that is the law under the Constitution and now the Supreme Court.
So your statement that the Democrats need a strategy to fight the administration's desire to go after birthright citizenship again, do you have a strategy in mind?
Well, we have to continuously, and one way that not just Democrats, but the American public have been able to push back on a lot of the Trump administration's policies are to amplify the everyday stories and testimonies of the American people. When we talk about birthright citizens, this is something that directly impacts and threatens our families here in Queens and all around the country. And so we have to continue to be vigilant. We have to continue to amplify their stories. He wants the Supreme Court to rehear the case. That hasn't been done for decades, I believe. He floated the idea of, a constitutional amendment. Mike Johnson has to remember that he and the Congress are a separate branch of government. We do not work for President Trump in the White House. And that would be extremely difficult, as you know, to pass. But we have to keep vigilant.
And realistically speaking, I've seen a political analysis that any so-called birth tourism bill would never get through the Senate with the 60-vote requirements there. So this whole topic is really just to give Republicans something to run on and galvanize outrage and turnout among those in their base who get lit up by this topic, not actually a threat to anyone in any kind of near term. Do you agree with that analysis?
I do. They are really good at kind of manufacturing and blowing out of proportion what they perceive to be a problem, just to, motivate their base. And I mentioned, for example, the sale of land to the Chinese. That's less than 1%, but of purchases. But we have seen state legislation, explode all over the country as the Republicans try to paint it as a real threat.
Can I ask, how else is the Trump administration deportation push or new restrictions on even coming to this country legally affecting your constituents? Are there some main ways?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that our constituents here in Queens, many of them are scared. And one of the saddest things that I heard in the early months of the Trump administration was when a Korean American grandfather and an Indian American grandfather told me in the same week that this was not the country that they dreamt of and sacrificed their adulthood for. That they, of course, believe in border security, but they did not like the chaotic nature of how ICE was patrolling and attacking and kidnapping people off the streets here in Queens. We've had cases of young kids, 6-year-olds, who've been separated from their families. We had a case where a woman was literally on the TSA line at LaGuardia. She happened to wear a hijab and had darker skin and was just grabbed off the wait line and sent to ICE detention in another state. And after a few months, we were able to work with her lawyers and reunite her with her family. But people are scared to go to church. They're scared to go to school. They're scared to, show up for the legal appointments that where our law is asking them to follow the law, but we're making them feel threatened in order to follow the law. And so it's a very scary time for so many people.
Listeners, we can take some comments, questions, or your own stories, maybe along the lines of the one that Congresswoman Meng was just telling, or anything else. If it's relevant for Congresswoman from Queens, Grace Meng, 212-433. WNYC, call or text 212-433-9692. It can be on birthright citizenship after the Supreme Court ruling, so-called birth tourism, or any other aspect. It can be on anything related to the midterms, including her own successful defense of her seat against a primary challenger from the left, or anything else relevant to Congresswoman Meng. 212-433 WNYC, 212-433-9692. And here is somebody on so-called birth tourism. Carol in Manhattan, you're on WNYC. Hi, Carol. Thank you for calling in.
Hi, thank you for taking the call. Are you hearing me?
Yes, we have you.
Okay, great. So, we all know, or most people agree that birthright citizenship, this whole issue, is grounded on discrimination more than anything else. But I'm a native New Yorker, and I remember very clearly in 2019, there was an investigative series that identified maternity hotels operating in Queens. So while, with all due respect to the Congresswoman, I think some of this is based on fact. It's not fabricated, as I believe she suggested, or exaggerated. The reporting actually described homes that outwardly appeared to be single-family residences, but functioned as businesses, housing mothers and newborns. And what it exposed was the regulatory gaps that allowed people to do this. It happened that there were Chinese nationals that were buying properties and using them as birthing hotels. And I frankly fact-checked myself before placing the call, but I think it would benefit the representative of the district to go back in history and look at what's happened. And I think what is missing is the regulations that allow people to come to this country. And it's not just with regard to birthright citizenship. We've got a lot of Russian nationals, Saudis, people from overseas that own huge swaths of land and properties in the United States.
Carol, I'm going to leave it there and get a response specifically on that 2019 so-called birthing hotels case. You're familiar with that, right?
A little bit, yes, I remember.
So what would you say to the caller?
So I understand the concern, and we can definitely and absolutely should have a larger, more serious discussion on the need for immigration reform. And I don't remember the outcome of that 2019 case, but I will say, and this is, birthright tourism, the statistics show that it is less than like 1 or 2% of babies born in the US. And I do want to add, as someone who comes from the Chinese community myself, what is common in our culture, whether you are back in Taiwan, whether you are here in New York, when a mom has a baby, the culture and the custom is to be at home for a month. If you can, you are pampered. There in our home countries, there are services that provide meals. Family members take care of you. And so this is something that is a strong tradition to nurture the health of the mom when she delivers a baby. And so, yes, I know for a fact that there are businesses where mom of a newborn and her family can pre-order special meals. Or be in a center, and I'm not the authority on zoning regulations, so that's another issue. But be in a center where, like a spa, where you are taken care of and pampered, and that is a big part, probably unfamiliar part of our culture. Many East Asian cultures, at least, that might not be as well known, and be maybe even mistaken as alleged birthright tourism.
Sheila in Westchester, you're on WNYC. Hi, Sheila.
Hi there, and hi, Congresswoman. This question is really thinking about, okay, fine, they make this a law, so how are they going to enforce this? So if I go to an American consulate for a visa, are they going to do a scan of all women to determine whether they are pregnant when they get the visa, or perhaps it's when they enter the country and the entry point, a woman looks large. Is she going to be forced to have a scan to see if she's pregnant? This makes no sense.
It's a great point, and it certainly might be, I don't know, even the thing that would stop this from getting through Congress. The idea that they may do sort of random scans on women in particular entering the country on legal visas just to see if they're pregnant, to make sure that they're not coming for so-called birth tourism. It's a great point, Congresswoman, isn't it?
I like and agree with what Sheila says. And if this type of legislation ever came up, that would be part of the argument against it.
One more on this. Baba in Hempstead, you're on WNYC with Congresswoman Grace Meng of Queens. Hi, Baba.
Hi, good morning. How are you?
Good, thank you.
So I'm calling just to add to the fact that it's going to be a difficult thing, and so many innocent people are going to be affected. Now, for example, the only player in the World Cup since 1930 that has scored for the U.S. twice in a game could be qualified or disqualified under the birth tourism situation. This is a guy that was given birth to here unintentionally. The mother was in transit. She was going to travel
going
to
back
UK.
to England. This is the big star, right?
Yeah.
Who was going to be suspended for a game because of a penalty, and Trump intervened on his behalf. We talked about this story early in the show. The whole country was paying attention to this. Fuller and Balogun, who Trump intervened on behalf of this birthright citizenship to get his suspension overturned so the U.S. would have a better chance of winning, right? That guy.
Exactly.
But your point is?
My point is, if the mother had been in this country under someone like Trump, America would not have that opportunity of having such a great player qualified for the U.S. team. So there is so much good than whatever evil they are trying to create out of people giving birth in the U.S. under whatever circumstances.
Yes, but Baba, the other side would push back and say, okay, Balogun may be a great soccer player and maybe he's a great person, but he, as you say, his mother was trying to go back to England and where they lived and couldn't get out of the country. And so accidentally, as you say, he was born in the United States. Should that be enough for that person to have United States citizenship for his whole life?
The Constitution says if you are born in the U.S., you are a U.S. citizen. Why do we want to argue with that?
Baba, thank you very much. Call us again. Changing topics, but staying on immigration, Congresswoman. I don't know if there are many Haitians or Syrians in your district, but those communities, as I'm sure you know, are facing a different kind of disruption based on another Supreme Court ruling just the other week that beginning today, I believe, Trump can remove temporary protected status from people from those two nations who were given that status because of threats to their safety in those countries. So as of today, their work visas could be revoked. Any advice or political strategy for anyone in that position? Either a political strategy to fight, against that Supreme Court ruling, or any advice for individuals in your district if they happen to be Syrians or Haitians on TPS?
Yeah, this is a very frightening moment. And a few weeks ago at this point, we were in front of the Supreme Court. We were with colleagues like Laura Gillen and Ayanna Pressley, who successfully passed legislation on the House floor on this very issue with TPS in relation to Haiti. We need the Senate to pass that same legislation. However, that would only affect Haitians. And, the Trump administration is trying to send people back to their home countries where we have travel safety warnings for our own citizens if they were to travel to those countries because there is deemed to be danger and instability on the ground. And yet he wants to send people who have been here for a long time. Haitians are people in this country who are literally, many of them are caregivers. They are taking care of our family members and our neighbors. And it is a very scary moment. And so we are advocating for the extension of TPS, not just for Haitians and Syrians, but also Venezuelans, for the Nepalese, for so many communities whose lives would be at risk if they were sent back. And we are in communication with, for example, the Department of Homeland Security. I want to thank a lot of our local advocacy organizations who are working on the ground here in Queens and New York, and we're doing what we can.
What would the legislation do, or how would it protect Syrians or Haitians or anyone else here on TPS, given the Supreme Court ruling that gave President Trump the power to withdraw it?
Well, this, and I do want to say this legislation pushed by Laura Gillen and Ayanna, it's a bipartisan piece of legislation. It is something that would protect the Haitians who are here. In this case, it would require Department of Homeland Security to extend that TPS. And to be clear, we want this for Haitians and for other communities as well. The House has passed it at this point because there is so much outcry from the American public that there was bipartisan support, and now we want the Senate to do the same thing.
Just one more thing on this. The Republicans would argue temporary protected status means temporary protected status. And a lot of the Haitians with TPS have been here since before the earthquake, which was around 15 years ago now. And Syrians, a lot of them have been here for 10 years now, since the Syrian civil war was at its peak. So what's the meaning of temporary if it seems to be extended and extended past those periods of time?
I hear that. And of course, TPS was created as a temporary and short-term solution to provide like humanitarian and a safety net. But we have to also recognize that the conditions in their home country have not changed. And many TPS holders, beneficiaries, they've lived here for years. They have community ties. They're actually filling critical labor gaps. And if you were, for example, to remove thousands of Haitians, across the country in places like New York and Florida and Massachusetts, it would create a real economic situation. And so for safety and stability, which has always been the intent on both sides for something like this. But yeah, it is part of, you're right, a larger discussion on what the United States needs to continue to do to work to provide, partner with home countries and provide more stability in the home country.
When we continue with Congresswoman Meng, we'll turn to her primary victory against the challenger from her left and the state of the party nationally in the midterms, in her view. Later in the hour, we'll get a take on that from the co-chairs of New York City DSA as well. 212-433 WNYC. Stay with us. Brian Lehrer on WNYC. We continue now with Congresswoman from Queens, Grace Meng. On your victory on primary day, it wasn't that close, so it didn't get the press coverage during the campaign that the more competitive races did. But I want to read for our listeners how Hellgate, for example, described the challenge that you faced from Chuck Park. It asked, can a more left-leaning Queens Democrat challenge Grace Meng's dominance in the district you've represented? She's represented for 12 years. And it said Park hoped to mobilize the Mamdani base over your, quote, substantial donations from AIPAC and your, quote, refusal to denounce billionaire Mets owner Steve Cohen's mega casino, unquote, from Hellgate. So those kinds of things, especially the AIPAC ties, resonated more in those several other districts where DSA candidates or Brett Lander won. Why do you think it didn't, enough so in your case, to make that close?
Well, first, I have a very interesting district. It is obviously a Democratic district, but it also has purple areas. My district had the largest swing from Biden to Trump in all of the congressional districts in the whole country. And I think what we did, and look, primaries are a part of democracy. It is an opportunity for candidates to talk about their accomplishments. And I think that our constituents, our voters recognize that while, we may not be satisfied and people are very scared with what's happening in this country right now, they're worried about the state of our democracy. They want to see more efforts, more response from government, and being able to lower costs. But I think that I've been someone who, even in a district with purple neighborhoods, been a faithful partner with progressive local elected officials and community leaders and progressive organizations. And we showed that we're not just fighting the Trump administration every day, but we're also delivering for our community. And because I have been there for a few years, I think that people recognize that it was important to fight, but also to deliver for our neighbors.
On this topic, Elisa in Queens, who says she's in your district. Elisa, you're on WNYC with Congresswoman Meng.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Well, first of all, I'm feeling a tremendous amount of dissonance across the board in terms of what I'm hearing from Congresswoman Meng. First of all, in terms of being responsive to the progressive community, the town halls that she's held over the past few years are town halls that are not ones where you could ask questions directly. She refused to debate her opponent, and we had no opportunity to ask her about the bigger things, which is what leads me to the second point. Hearing her talk about protecting babies and mothers, while still being somebody who takes a tremendous amount of AIPAC money is infuriating to me, especially after we got the UN report saying that it's clear that the Israelis are directly targeting children. And there are so many of her constituents that feel unheard. And Chuck Park was somebody who came out of nowhere, and she only won by 13.9 points in this. So, and outspent her opponent with PAC money, with corporate money. This is a primary that should have gotten a lot more attention.
Congresswoman, your response to Elisa's concerns.
Well, I appreciate Elisa's call. I know that she was a crucial member on my opponent's team, but I still, I hear her. We do a lot of virtual town halls, and we're able to get a few more thousand people than when we're doing them in person. We were scheduled for a debate, and the organizer canceled it at the last minute. And yes, I do take money from Jewish New Yorkers and Jewish individuals, but that doesn't mean that I agree with everything that an organization like AIPAC is pushing. I don't accept super PAC money, for example, and so that's something that I've been really clear on as an early co-sponsor of Congresswoman Summerlee's bill to ban all super PACs. And it's a really diverse district. I know that in the last few years, our diverse communities have felt in their own ways a lot of pain. We have worked hard to surge thousands of tons of aid to Gaza, and she's right, it's not enough. We are still working for a real ceasefire, and we are navigating this situation, trying to balance all the interests of our diverse district.
On Israel and AIPAC in particular, it was easy in a Google search this morning for me to come up with an AIPAC video interview with you from 2 years ago called Representative Grace Meng Joins AIPAC to Discuss Her Personal Connection to the State of Israel and the Importance of a Strong U.S.-Israel Alliance. Is your position on AIPAC-related campaign spending on your behalf, or whether the U.S. should continue U.S. military aid, considering Gaza and Lebanon, changing at all for you?
I think just because I've taken money from AIPAC, which is essentially a portal for Jewish Americans to donate to candidates of their choice, doesn't mean that I agree with everything that Prime Minister Netanyahu or the Israeli government is doing. I've spoken up and have led the efforts to surge humanitarian aid to Gaza. I have spoken against illegal settlement expansion and violence in the West Bank. And that does not affect even, whether I take money from the PAC or not.
But isn't that exactly what AIPAC does, is support the Netanyahu government?
There are a lot of political action committees involved in donating to candidates, of course, but like I said, that doesn't mean that they control what votes I take or what I vote for or what I don't vote for.
One other thing on that, on the way AIPAC sometimes hides where the money is coming from or with what agenda. Here's something from the New York Times On Politics newsletter last week. Before the Democratic primary win by DSA member Malat Kiros, over longtime Congresswoman Diana DeJette in Colorado. It said, quote, DeJette is being propped up by late outside spending, the origins of which, as is often the case now, can be difficult to pinpoint. A new pro-DeJette super PAC called Pro-Choice Majority Action has spent more than $1 million with money that came from another PAC that received funds from two other pro-Israel PACs. One of those PACs has supported DeJette and no other candidates, unquote from the Times. Is that kind of obscuring the source of money okay with you? And should it not be a reason, some people would ask, for you to stop taking AIPAC-linked what might be called dark money?
I mean, that's a conversation that we'll have to have going forward. Look, I don't like super PACs at all. Not just the ones that come from AIPAC or AIPAC disguised and affiliated, entities. I don't like any of the super PACs. I don't think that it allows constituents, voters' voices to be heard in an equitable way. And that's why, as soon as Summerlee put forth her bill to ban all super PACs, I signed up because I agree with that.
You consider yourself a progressive, I think you'd say, and you said, but you're not in DSA. Why not, or what would you say your main policy differences are with them in this year after Mayor Mamdani won citywide and DSA did well in those House primaries in other districts and apparently picked up 5 more state assembly seats as well?
Yeah, look, I think that, DSA has shown that they are very good organizers. They are on the ground. They are very active in many of the communities, whether here in Queens or across the city. And let's be clear, just because a candidate who is part of the DSA won a primary, they won fair and square, right? And so it's important that we, as a big tent Democratic Party, work with them. And we have to remember, and yes, there may be differences that I have with DSA, and sorry, I haven't read their, entire mission, but maybe, either public safety or global affairs. I just have to, take a closer look on the specific differences. But what we have to remember that the enemy is not within the Democratic Party. We need to make sure that we're doing everything we can to push back in November and to beat Republicans. And especially as someone who's part of the House, we need to make sure that we're doing everything we can to restore a House majority to the Democrats. That is the best way to restore democracy, protect our constituents, keep our families safe, and to put a big obstacle in the way of this wannabe king in Donald Trump.
Congressman Suozzi from the district just east of yours in Northeast Queens and part of Nassau calls himself a Democratic capitalist, not a Democratic socialist. He'll be one of our guests next week, as will Congresswoman-elect Daria-Liza Avila-Chevallier, as we continue to get diverse perspectives on where New York Democrats are or think the party overall should be. But do you use that term to describe yourself, Democratic capitalist? Or what do you think when you hear Suozzi use that, which he's been saying a lot?
I don't really like labels. I consider myself a Democrat who is progressive and also constructive. We are not treating this, I am not treating this as a civil war within the Democratic Party, but as a broadening of the party. There are real personal and interesting debates that are happening within our party. And we need to make sure that we are united as we approach November. The districts, even within the city and the state of New York, including districts like Tom Suozzi, Mike Lawler, Pat Ryan, Josh Riley, they all won with very different messaging. Messaging in one of their districts might look completely different with our new members to be Claire and Daria-Lisa. But again, we need to stay focused and remember that the real enemy to beat is in November.
Congresswoman Grace Meng, Democrat from Queens. We always appreciate when you come on with us. Congratulations on your renomination. Thanks a lot for today.
Thank you so much.
WNYC's journalism and storytelling is heard by millions of passionate listeners. Sponsors of our programming gain our listeners' attention and their respect. Learn about how your organization can support WNYC and WNYC Studios at sponsorship.wnyc.org.
The United States is about to mark its 250th anniversary.
And so, on the Global Story podcast from the BBC, we're telling surprising tales of American influence on the world stage and in ordinary people's lives all across the globe.
We have this ability to export our story, and a lot of people have bought it.
I feel like the American dream is alive but not well.
From the BBC, it's the United States at 250.
Listen wherever you get your podcasts or find us on YouTube.